I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen the way you would listen to your own grandmother. Slowly. Kindly. Because this is not a story I tell to accuse anyone. It's a story I tell because it changed me. I arrived at my son's house on Christmas Eve just as the sky was growing dark. Snow had been falling since afternoon, the kind that softens the world and makes everything look gentle, even when it isn't. I remember tightening my scarf and steadying my breath before I walked up the driveway. My hands were full. One bag held a small gift I had chosen carefully for my grandson. The other held bread I baked that very morning. I baked it the way my mother taught me, patient, quiet, full of hope. I didn't rush. I wasn't nervous. I truly believed I was welcome. When I knocked, I smiled before the door even opened. Old habits are hard to break. Mothers do that. Grandmothers especially. My son opened the door, and for a moment, I didn't recognize his face. Not because he looked different, but because there was nothing there. No warmth. No surprise. No joy. His eyes went straight to my hands, not my face. He looked at what I brought, not who I was. "You're early," he said. That was all. I remember thinking how strange it was that he didn't say Merry Christmas. I remember answering anyway, because that's what mothers do when their children forget their manners. "I didn't want to keep anyone waiting," I said. "Merry Christmas." He stepped aside without replying. Inside, the house was alive with voices and music. Laughter floated through the rooms. The tree blinked in soft colors. Everyone else seemed settled, comfortable, already part of something that had begun without me. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to place myself, feeling like someone who had arrived at the wrong time, or the wrong life. My daughter-in-law sat on the couch, holding her phone up toward the tree. She was smiling for the screen, adjusting her hair, fixing the angle. I waited for her to look up. She didn't. When she finally did, her eyes brushed past me like I was furniture. She nodded once. That was it. I took off my gloves slowly. I placed the bags down carefully, the way you do when you still believe care will be noticed. Then I heard running. "Grandma." That voice saved me, if only for a second. My grandson came toward me so fast he nearly tripped. He wrapped his arms around my legs, holding on as if I might disappear. I bent down and hugged him, breathing him in, feeling his warmth, his small heartbeat against me. In that moment, my chest ached with love and with something else. Fear, maybe, because I already sensed this hug wouldn't be allowed to last. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you too," I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. From across the room, my daughter-in-law called out, "Sweetheart, let Grandma breathe. She just got here." The words sounded polite. The tone did not. He stepped back but stayed close, his hand still brushing mine. I walked toward the dining room then, and that's when my body stopped before my mind did. The table was fully set. Every plate placed just so. Glasses filled. Napkins folded. Chairs pulled in neatly. All of them occupied. There was no seat for me. I stood there, longer than I should have, hoping someone would notice. Hoping someone would say, "Oh my goodness, we forgot." But no one did. I looked at my son. He did not look back. I placed the bread on the counter, my hands moving automatically, because standing still felt too vulnerable. I reached for the small gift, thinking I would place it near the tree, when suddenly I heard a chair scrape loudly against the floor. "Mom, stop," my son said. The room fell silent. "Don't put that there." I turned slowly, my heart heavy but my face calm. Everyone was looking now. Every conversation had stopped. Every fork was frozen midair. "You're not welcome here," he said. "You need to leave." For a moment, I wondered if I had heard him wrong. Mothers do that too. We search for gentler meanings when the truth is too sharp. "I brought something for your son," I said quietly. "We don't need anything from you," he replied. My grandson's hand found mine again. "Dad, please," he said. My son didn't look at him. No one spoke up. Not one person. People I had fed. People I had helped. People who once called me family. I realized then that staying would only teach my grandson that this was acceptable. And I loved him too much to do that. I squeezed his hand once and let go. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'll see you soon." I stood straight, pulled my coat around me, and looked at my son. Not with anger, not with tears, but with the quiet disappointment only a mother can feel. "As you wish," I said. He blinked. He didn't expect calm. He expected pleading. I walked out. The cold met me immediately, but I welcomed it. Snow touched my face, and I breathed deeply. Behind me, the door closed gently, as if nothing important had just happened. And that's when I understood. Sometimes, you don't lose your family in one loud moment. Sometimes you lose them quietly, and find yourself in the silence. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car with my hands resting on the steering wheel, watching snow collect on the windshield. The radio was off. I didn't want noise. Noise felt like a lie. I just wanted to sit there and let the moment finish happening to me. You know, when you're young, sadness feels loud. It shakes you. It demands tears. But when you are old, sadness is quiet. It settles into your bones. It doesn't ask permission. It simply stays. I thought about all the Christmas mornings I had created with my own hands. The ones where I woke before sunrise to cook, to wrap gifts, to make sure everyone else felt joy before I allowed myself any rest. I remembered my son as a boy, running barefoot across cold floors, his hair messy, his eyes full of wonder. I remembered how he used to crawl into my bed when he had bad dreams. And I wondered, not for the first time, when love began to feel like an inconvenience to him. When I finally drove home, the house greeted me the way it always did, quietly. No music. No laughter. Just the familiar creak of the door and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I took off my coat and hung it carefully, even though no one was watching. Old habits again. I placed the untouched gift and the bread on the table. Then I sat down. And that's when my hands started shaking. Not from the cold. From the realization that I was truly alone now. I didn't cry that night. Tears come later, when the body feels safe enough to fall apart. Instead, I made tea and wrapped myself in a blanket my late husband used to love. I stared at the wall and listened to the clock tick, each second reminding me that time moves forward even when your heart resists. That night, memories came to me without invitation. I remembered my husband's laugh, low and warm. I remembered how he used to say, "One day, they'll understand what you gave them." At the time, I thought he meant appreciation. Now I understood he meant distance. He passed away quietly years ago, holding my hand. I stayed strong after that. I had to. Mothers don't fall apart when their children still need them. Even when those children grow old enough to forget it. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a strange clarity. No one called. Not my son. Not my daughter-in-law. Not even to ask if I had made it home safely. That silence hurt more than the words from the night before. I went about my day slowly. I watered the plants. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I cleaned already clean surfaces. These small movements were my way of staying grounded, of reminding myself that I still existed. In the afternoon, I sat by the window and watched children play outside. Their laughter drifted through the glass. I smiled without realizing it, then felt the ache return. I wondered if my grandson was laughing too. I wondered if he asked where I was. Weeks passed like that. No invitation. No apology. No explanation. At first, I checked my phone often. Then less. Then hardly at all. And something strange happened in that quiet. I began to rest. Not the kind of rest that comes from sleep, but the kind that comes from not chasing love anymore. I stopped making excuses for my son's behavior. I stopped telling myself stories that softened the truth. I stopped pretending I was still needed in places where I was only tolerated. Instead, I turned inward. I found old photo albums and spent hours flipping through them. I saw a younger version of myself, a woman with tired eyes but a strong back, always holding someone else up. I wondered why I had never held myself the same way. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It wasn't from my son. It was from a community center nearby, inviting seniors to join a weekly storytelling group. I almost threw it away. What story did I have that anyone would want to hear? But something inside me whispered, go. The first day I went, I sat in the back. I listened. Others spoke of lost spouses, distant children, forgotten years. Their voices trembled the way mine did inside, even when I kept it steady on the outside. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I spoke. Not about Christmas. Not about rejection. I spoke about bread. I spoke about how my mother taught me to knead dough slowly, patiently, and how love was never rushed in our house. I spoke about the way care is passed down through hands, not words. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone said, "Thank you for sharing." No one dismissed me. No one told me to leave. I went back the next week. And the week after that. Little by little, I felt something return to me, dignity. I wasn't invisible there. I wasn't a burden. I was simply a woman with a life, with memories, with value. One evening, months later, my phone rang. My son's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer right away. Not out of spite. Out of strength. Because for the first time, I understood something deeply. I could love him, without losing myself. When my phone finally stopped ringing that evening, I set it down face down on the table. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. And that surprised me more than anything. For years, I had lived in a constant state of readiness, ready to forgive, ready to explain, ready to adjust myself so others could remain comfortable. That night, I realized I didn't need to be ready anymore. I could simply be. The next morning, I woke early and made myself breakfast, a proper one. Toast fruit te. I sat at the table and ate slowly, tasting each bite. It felt strange to care for myself with the same attention I had always given to others. Later that day, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Hello," I said. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear breathing. Heavy. Uneven. "Mom," my son said. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "We need to talk." I closed my eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to gather myself. "All right," I replied. "I'm listening." He exhaled. About Christmas, things got complicated. Complicated. Another soft word people use when they don't want to say wrong. "I don't want to argue," he continued quickly. Lauren was stressed. The house was full. It just wasn't a good time. I listened. I truly did. I didn't interrupt. I let him say everything he had been holding back, every excuse neatly wrapped in logic. When he finally stopped, waiting for me to respond, the silence stretched. "I hear you," I said gently. "But I need you to hear me too." He didn't speak. I wasn't upset because I was asked to leave, I continued. I was hurt because no one thought to make a place for me before I arrived. There it was. The truth. Plain. Calm. Undeniable. He shifted audibly. "We didn't mean." "I know," I said. "And that's what hurts." Another pause. "I want to come by," he said finally. "So we can talk in person." I considered it. Not emotionally, carefully. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow afternoon." When he arrived the next day, he stood in the doorway the way I had once stood in his, uncertain, unsure where he belonged. I invited him in, offered tea. He declined. He looked around the house like it was unfamiliar, like he had forgotten its shape. We sat across from each other at the table. He spoke first. Apologies tumbled out, imperfect and unfinished. He said he hadn't realized how things had gotten so far. He said he was trying to keep peace in his marriage. He said he never meant to push me away. I listened. Then I placed my hands flat on the table, the way I used to when I needed my children to pay attention. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I am not asking for a seat at your table if it costs me my dignity." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I will no longer arrive where I am merely tolerated," I replied. "I will not shrink myself to make others comfortable." He looked startled, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "I love you," I said. "That hasn't changed. But love does not mean silent acceptance." He swallowed. Are you saying you won't come around anymore? I'm saying, I answered slowly, that I will come where I am welcomed. The words hung between us, not as a threat, but as a boundary. He nodded slowly. I didn't realize how strong you'd become. I almost smiled. After he left, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I had finally spoken without fear of losing him. And that, I learned, is real strength. Weeks passed. Sometimes my son called. Sometimes he didn't. I no longer counted the days between. I continued going to the storytelling group. I began volunteering twice a week, helping children learn to read. Their small hands reminded me that love still had places to go. One afternoon, my grandson came with my son. He ran to me the moment he saw me, his arms tight around my waist. "Grandma," he said, pressing his face into my sweater, "I was worried you didn't love us anymore." My heart cracked softly. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "My love never left. I just had to learn where to place it." My son watched us from the doorway. His eyes were wet. That day, he stayed for dinner. He helped clear the table. He asked questions about my life, questions he hadn't asked in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And honesty, I had learned, is the first step toward healing. After that evening, when my grandson fell asleep on my couch with his shoes still on, something in me softened. Not toward the pain, but toward myself. I watched his chest rise and fall, slow and peaceful. Children don't pretend when they feel safe. And in that moment, I understood something important. I had not failed as a mother. I had simply raised a child who was now learning his own lessons. Late perhaps, but still learning. When my son left that night, he hugged me longer than usual. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence carries more truth than words. But healing is not a straight line. Some weeks were good. Some were quiet. And some were heavy. There were mornings I woke up feeling older than my years. My joints ached, my hands stiff from decades of work. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, holding babies, wiping tears that weren't my own. I would sit at the edge of my bed and take a deep breath before standing, reminding myself that this body had carried love for a lifetime. I began sorting through old boxes in the spare room. Things I had packed away after my husband passed. Letters, photographs, small objects with large memories. There was a picture of me in my 20s, holding my son on my hip. I looked tired in that photo. But I also looked determined. I remembered that woman. She had no roadmap, no guarantees, only hope and responsibility. I sat on the floor and cried for her. Not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for so long without rest. One afternoon, my son called again. "Mom," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about what you said. About being welcomed." I listened. I realized, he continued, that I was so focused on keeping everyone else comfortable, I stopped protecting you. That sentence settled deep in my chest. "I don't expect things to change overnight," he added. "But I want to do better." "I believe you," I replied. And I meant it. That night, I lit a candle at my kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to him, but to myself. I wrote about every time I swallowed my hurt to keep peace. Every time I apologized when I hadn't done anything wrong. Every time I showed up with love and left feeling small. Then I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. I didn't burn it. I didn't tear it up. Some memories don't need destruction. They need acknowledgement. Weeks turned into months. My granddaughter began calling me on her own phone. Sometimes just to tell me about school. Sometimes to ask how to make my soup recipe. Sometimes just to say goodnight. Those calls healed parts of me I hadn't known were still wounded. One evening she asked, "Grandma, why don't you come over as much anymore?" I chose my words carefully. "Because sometimes," I said, "grown-ups have to learn how to treat each other kindly, just like children do." She thought for a moment. "Are they learning?" "I hope so," I said softly. I also learned to say no. No to last-minute demands. No to disrespect dressed up as humor. No to silence when something felt wrong. And every time I did, my voice grew steadier. One Sunday afternoon, my son invited me to dinner again. This time, when I arrived, there was a chair waiting for me. Not at the end. Not squeezed in. But beside my granddaughter. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't dramatic. But it mattered. During dinner, no one rushed me. No one spoke over me. My son refilled my glass without being asked. His wife met my eyes more than once. We weren't close, but we were civil. And sometimes, civility is the bridge before warmth. When dessert was served, my granddaughter leaned against me and whispered, "I'm glad you came." So was I. That night, as I drove home, I realized something surprising. I wasn't chasing acceptance anymore. I had already accepted myself. And that changed everything. Noise fades. I didn't know that choosing myself would feel so quiet. People often imagine strength as something loud. Raised voices, slammed doors, dramatic endings. But my strength came softly, like the first light in the morning that doesn't ask permission to enter the room. After that dinner, life didn't suddenly become perfect. My son didn't transform overnight. His wife didn't become warm and welcoming. There were still pauses in conversations. Still moments where old habits tried to return. But I was no longer the same woman who would bend to keep peace. And that made all the difference. I began spending more time in my own home, doing things I had once postponed for someday. I painted the spare room a soft yellow. I planted herbs by the window. I framed old photos instead of hiding them in drawers. Each small act felt like reclaiming space, not just in my house, but in my life. One afternoon, as I sat knitting near the window, my granddaughter called again. "Grandma," she said, "my teacher asked us who our hero is." I smiled. "And who did you choose?" There was a pause. "Then, you." My hands stilled. "Why me?" I asked gently. "Because," she said, "you're kind, but you don't let people be mean to you anymore." I closed my eyes, letting that truth sink deep. That night I cried, not from sadness but from gratitude. If this was the lesson my granddaughter carried forward, then everything I had endured had meaning. Months passed. I noticed my son listening more when I spoke. Asking instead of assuming. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he forgot. But he corrected himself. And I allowed him the dignity of learning, just as I had allowed myself the dignity of changing. One evening, he stood in my kitchen, watching me make tea. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think being strong meant never upsetting anyone." I nodded. "But now," he continued, "I see it means being honest, even when it's uncomfortable." I turned and looked at him. "That's wisdom," I said. "It comes late to some of us." He smiled, not as a boy needing approval, but as a man understanding consequence. As for me, I no longer waited for invitations that came with conditions. I no longer brought gifts where respect was absent. I no longer explained my worth. I simply showed up where I was valued, and stayed home where I was not. And something beautiful happened. The more I honored myself, the more others learned how to treat me. On my birthday that year, my granddaughter baked a small cake with her own hands. It leaned a little to one side. The frosting was uneven. But it was perfect. She hugged me tightly and said, "I want to be like you when I'm old." I laughed softly. "Oh sweetheart," I said, "being old isn't the goal. Being true is." Now, when I look back at that Christmas Eve, the cold driveway, the closed door, the silence, I no longer feel hurt. I feel thankful. Because that night gave me clarity. It showed me where I stood. It showed me who I had become. And it showed me that even in old age, a woman can choose herself without losing her heart. I am a grandmother. I have loved deeply. I have been wounded quietly. I have learned late, but not too late. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this. Respect is not something you beg for. It is something you stand still long enough to receive, or strong enough to walk away without. That is the story I will leave behind. And that is enough.